A community in West Africa wiped out. Gunmen brutally kill more than 150 Muslim villagers. The United Nations demands an investigation, but will anyone be held accountable? I'm Imran Garda, and today's newsmaker is the massacre in Mali. It was early morning in Ouagadougou when gunmen dressed as traditional hunters attacked. Within hours, more than 100 men, women and children had been massacred. The dead are from the Fulani tribe, considered the world's largest nomadic group. They're predominantly Muslim, and rights groups say they're often targeted by tribal rivals who accuse them of being extremists. The UN has now deployed a team to investigate. Tribal clashes in central Mali's restive region of Mopti are nothing new. At least 600 people have been killed there in the past year. So, is the government failing to bring perpetrators to justice? Haider Abbasi reports.
Armed men surrounded this village at dawn. Then they attacked anyone who came into their sights. Men, women and children. At least 150 people died here in central Mali. Since the attack, President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta has promised to improve security.
En cas d'alerte, je ne peux pas tolérer, je ne tolérerai plus que l'on mette 1 à 2 heures avant d'être sur le lieu. Les équipes doivent être en permanence mobilisées. Nous ne sommes pas en temps de paix.
He's fired the army chief of staff and another general. Keïta's blaming the attack on a militia from the Dogon community. The victims were Fulani, semi-nomadic herdsmen who are spread across West Africa and the Sahel. There's a history of tensions between the mostly Muslim Fulani and established communities in the region. Dogon farmers accuse the Fulani of destroying their crops by using their land for cattle grazing. They also say some Fulani have joined violent groups, such as Al-Qaeda. The Dogons say they've been targeted by these terrorists.
The incident did not greatly surprise us. We had been expecting some violence, but what happened on Saturday was horrible. You cannot conceive of such carnage in our country. It's unthinkable.
The UN is urging Mali to carry out an investigation immediately.
These traditional disputes have always been there, but lately it has taken on a particularly deadly turn because entire Fulani communities, and we're talking about millions of people, are being painted as violent extremists simply because they're Muslim.
Communal violence in Mali has surged, especially in a central region known as Mopti. That's where the most recent massacre took place. The UN estimates 600 people were killed in Mopti last year. Thousands more have been forced from their homes. Government control in Mopti is weak, and militants have exploited the power vacuum. They've also taken advantage of ethnic tensions and recruited from the Fulani community. Nusrat al-Islam claimed an attack last week that killed 20 soldiers, saying it was a response to violence against the Fulani. Both the Fulani and the Dogon accuse the government of failing to protect them. This has led to both communities creating their own self-defense forces. It's also encouraged some to join groups like Al-Qaeda. So can Mali's government reassert control and solve this cycle of violence? Haider Abbasi, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Bamako is Nyanakoro Samake. He's a former presidential candidate and Malian ambassador to India. He's also the executive director of Empower Mali, a foundation aimed at improving health and education. And in Paris, we have journalist and president of the African Information Club, Louis Kuemayu. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us on the Newsmakers. Let us start with the politician in Bamako. Mr. Samake, thanks for joining us. A lot of people looked at the news of the massacre, and their first question is why? Why has this happened?
Well, why has this happened is the question we're asking ourselves here in Mali. We certainly see this as unbelievable. From Mali, we all believe that we are very peaceful people in Mali. Of course, there is unrest in the northern area and in the center of Mali, but we have never seen in the history of our country this level of violence. And the question that everyone is asking, why? Why now? And why is this happening in our own country?
And looking at the root causes, and Louis, I'm going to come to you in a moment, but I want to ask you, Nyanakoro, looking at the root causes, we have Ravina Shamdasani from the UN saying, and I quote her, entire Fulani communities, and we are talking about millions of people, are being painted as violent extremists simply because they are Muslim, which then, of course, translates to the Dogon ethnic group and others going to kill them because they're just seen as terrorists. Is that accurate in your opinion?
Well, I think in that statement itself, there is a dichotomy, saying that this killing is happening because they are Muslim is far from true, because 95% of the people of Mali are Muslim. Let me really condemn vigorously what happened, as every Malian, including Malian #1, the president of Mali, His Excellency Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. We, all of the Malian people, see that, condemn this, what happened, whether it is Muslim, Christian, and non-religious group. So to see this as a religious conflict is lack of understanding of the societal and the sociology of things. But the reality is, many things happen lately when there is ungoverned territories, when there is the pressure of climate change, the need of resources, all combined into spiraling violence in the country. So what we're trying to do today is to cope with the situation with the help of the international community.
Right.
The president of Mali himself traveled to Ouagadougou to go witness what happened and to assure the villagers that they need to remain in this area, and the government of Mali will bring the necessary support to rebuild the village, but also to give them the necessary support right now that they need.
Okay, so Louis, more than 150 people are killed by members of the Dogon ethnic group. The people killed are from the Fulani group. What do you think the Malian government and the international community needs to do as a first initial response to this?
Well, I think, as I've heard before, the fact is that we are in an area where the government is not enough present to bring all the help population is looking for. I haven't done talk about the lack of jobs for the youth living there. I'm not talking about health. I'm not talking about all those schools people are looking for, the services the state should bring in that area, and that he's not able to bring now. Security is another issue people are looking for. But the fact is, we can't forget Mali is a neighbor, a close neighbor of Niger, and what is happening and also of Burkina Faso, what is happening in Mali is happening at the other side of the border also, with the Fulanis and the Pearl community, as they call them there.
Right.
It is only because we have some sedentaries who live there and who need to have their cultures growing up regularly. And also we have some farmers who need to find place with grass, with the field where the animals, the cows, can go and eat the field there. So those conflicts haven't started today. They are ancient. They are coming from very long times. We had it in Rwanda that produced the genocide. We are going to commemorate the 25th year it happened. So it is not only a matter of religion or a matter of people who are from a certain ethnic. It is because in that area, the government doesn't have enough means to ensure the role which is his own aside of the population living in that community. And we remember all, Mr. Kufa, the military, the French military said they killed was from the Fulani community.
Yes.
And when you are a Malian, and when every time you hear that the Pearl community is helping the jihadists, they are the enemies of the state. So everyone thinks if we are killing them, we are helping our country to fight terrorism in the northern part of Mali.
Okay, so then, let me then go back to Nyanakoro.
That's my point.
Okay, so we have issues of grazing rights, water, climate change is making things worse. Naturally, on the ground, it's difficult for people, and the state doesn't have a presence. You yourself would admit that, right? As a politician there. The state doesn't have a presence, and people are struggling to get by. These are all underlying root causes. But the people who did the killings call themselves self-defense groups. Now, they're claiming that they're defending their people against armed jihadis or extremists. Why are they taking it out on the likes of those innocent 157 people who were killed?
Well, the reality is, why is this happening? As your first question is, the international community, we have 14,000 UN forces in Mali with a mandate to protect the civilians in Mali. It is successful. The result we're having today point to the direction that the civilians in Mali are being failed with this mission. The other part is, it's true, the Malian government is the primary provider of security in these areas, and this has not yet happened. The other gentleman just pointed out, there is a lack of services there. But the actual actors of this who have perpetrated this crime has not yet been clearly defined from Mali government sources. Now Malian people are still doubting that Malian can commit such a barbaric act against other Malian is beyond understanding. The sources of the inter-community conflict, as the gentleman just pointed out, date back since the cohabitation of people. We are going to live together in this space. No one can wish that the other community or the other ethnic group disappears. But the government needs to take matter at hand. We need to have a clear vision for our security. We need to take clear policies. With or without the community, the international community, this is a Malian issue, and the solution is internal, not external. We cannot depend on external forces. They come as a support, not as a primary actors of fighting this terrorism. And that is my stand. We are calling upon our president, His Excellency Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta, that I have supported on the second round of the past election, that he needs to wear his mantle of leadership to lead the people, to gather, to bring us together to face this challenge. That is where the solution is. The UN will not be able to solve this problem because I don't think the United Nations is adequately equipped for intra-community conflict resolution. So the solution is not in Europe, is not in America. The solution is right here in Mali, and we depend on the president to be the leader, to lead the people of Mali, to bring us together, because our livelihood depends on it. This is far beyond politics. This is far beyond partisan politics. We need to step up and change the way, because the overall strategy for resolution of this conflict has failed.
Yeah, so Mr. Samake, you say that the Malian government still hasn't fully determined who did this, and you also say that the UN can't really provide a solution here. This has to come from the Malian government. They're sending investigators, right? They're sending an entire team there to go and figure out what happened. So what are you saying? Are you saying the UN won't make much of a difference? It's a waste of time?
Well, I am saying let's change strategy. The current strategy is not working. And objectively, we can say that, because violence has been spiraling in Mali. And this is not what we need right now. So investigations or not, we have to change the strategy. We have to make sure, for example, the UN or the forces in place can have a drone surveillance, a military drone surveillance, to make sure that we identify those who are committing crime. When people know that they will be identified, then it's a deterrent in itself. So these are things that we can do today. We can have drone surveillance over Mali today, and the means exist. So if the reality is to help resolve the problem, why can't we use this simple, even though expensive mechanism, but it can be done. They're spending more than $1 billion annually on the UN budget, yet we cannot, for the prevention of the people, for a successful mission of the United Nations in Mali, I believe that the use of drone surveillance will help tremendously to reduce the violence and the recurrence of violence in Mali.
Louis, how do you stop the violence?
Well, I think it's very difficult because it is not only violence inside a community, in an area. It is the violence because there is jihadism. We are fighting against jihadism. And when the UN says they are keeping peace, you can keep peace where there is no peace. You need to have peace before keeping it. So I think they should change now and try to fight, really, those who are not helping them to keep peace, and then after keep the peace, they will gain after that. And I think we cannot forget also that by destabilizing Libya, we've created a zone, an area under the Sahara where there is no peace, and those who have destabilized have also to help those areas to find peace again. Because it is not only a matter of Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, or Mauritania. It is now a whole problem of all the Sahel who has to fight against jihadism and to help the communities to have state with providing all the services he has to provide as a state, as a government. I agree with my friend that it is important to make sure that Malians are those who will find the solution primarily. After, they will need the help of the international community, of France, of Germany, of the European Union. But they are the first to decide how they are seeing the country and how they are helping it to be a peaceful country. So I think all the helps will be useful. They will be helpful. All the communities who will be there to help Malians rebuild the country will probably be helpful for the Malians. But I think it is by the Malians, by the government, by the population, everything will start.
Mr. Samake, very finally, more than 50,000 people are termed IDPs, internally displaced people, just in this region where the attack took place in Mopti. Every time there's violence, they flee. As a state, does the state have the capability to provide them with the basics before they can try to go back to their homes?
The government of Mali has taken matters at hand when it comes to internally displaced people. We have provided an area for them to stay, for example, in Bamako, but we have internally displaced people in Welesebugu, where we have designated areas for all of these people to be taken care of by the government. We provide them with the first aid kits and making sure they're provided with food and sanitation. So government is doing and working hard, also non-profit organization and the community itself. We have Malian people who are helping Malian people. And we are playing a major role in that. And even before the reaction of the government, people of Mali have been taking matters at hand, helping our brothers and sisters. This is the hospitality of Mali. This is the brotherhood that we have seen from the 100 years in Mali. So yes, the government is doing what it can to help internally displaced. NGOs are doing what they can to help internally displaced. But we have to get to the root cause of it. We have to make sure that good governance is a mode of governance in Mali. We have to make sure that basic services are being provided. We have to make sure that people finally have something to lose. When you don't have anything to lose, you can risk everything. So today I call on the leadership of Mali to make sure that we focus on providing security to the people of Mali. Security is front and center of our development objective, and we must tackle this with all of our might and all of our resources.
Yanakoro, yes, Samake, Louis Kermayu, Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure having you on the Newsmakers. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come, does Boeing have a fatal flaw? 2 of their jets crash in 5 months, killing hundreds, while another makes an emergency landing. Is the plane maker putting profits before safety? And election turmoil in Thailand. Millions voted, but the result is still unclear. Could an opposition coalition oust the country's military rulers? Flying is statistically the safest way to travel, but when things go wrong, more often than not, it has devastating results. Earlier this month, an Ethiopian Airlines plane came crashing down, killing all 157 people on board. It was the second deadly crash in just 5 months involving the same type of passenger jet, a state-of-the-art Boeing 737 MAX 8. Aviation experts suspect the blame for each crash lies with the same technical fault. Now, one of the world's most popular planes has been grounded. But should it have been in the air in the first place? Denise Savoya takes a look.
This is all that remains of Lion Air Flight 610. In October, the Boeing 737 MAX 8 crashed into the Java Sea just 12 minutes after taking off from Jakarta. All 189 people on board were killed. Flight data showed that it made a sudden, sharp dive.
At the end of the recording, it seemed the pilot felt he could no longer recover the flight. That's when the panic emerged.
Then this month, 157 people died when Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 crashed not long after leaving Addis Ababa. That too was a Boeing 737 MAX 8.
There are indications that there are clear similarities, especially with the number of minutes they spent after takeoff.
In the days that followed, more than 50 countries took steps to ground 737 MAX planes before the US president did the same with Boeing's entire 737 MAX 8 fleet.
Boeing is an incredible company. They are working very, very hard right now. And hopefully they'll very quickly come up with the answer. But until they do, the planes are grounded.
The 737 MAX 8 was launched globally in 2017 and quickly became the fastest-selling model in Boeing's history. The company website explains the model uses Boeing's latest display technology so that pilots get more information with less effort.
It looks like the old kind of airplane. It looks like a 737, but as aircraft are developing and evolving, aircraft are becoming more and more digital. As we automate aircraft, the pilots become less and less familiar with hand flying.
But it's precisely that technology that's being investigated as a possible cause of both disasters. In the case of the Lion Air crash, investigators suspect a sensor malfunctioned in what's called the plane's manoeuvring characteristics augmentation system. They think that may have triggered anti-stalling software, which automatically brought the plane's nose down. Experts say an MCAS safety feature that Boeing had been selling as an optional extra could have prevented that from happening. Neither the Lion Air nor Ethiopian Airlines planes had that feature installed. Last week, Boeing's CEO announced a software update, and while exact details haven't been released, insiders say it will add that optional safety feature as standard.
Our entire team stands behind the quality and the safety of the aircraft we design, produce, and support.
As investigators search for answers, it's been revealed that just one day before the Lion Air crash, the same plane began to dive after takeoff. An off-duty pilot in the cockpit was able to identify and correct the malfunction by cutting power to the motor that was driving the nose down. That has many experts asking why the crew on board the same plane the next day didn't have that information. And if the same malfunction is responsible for the Ethiopian Airlines crash, why did that crew not know either? The role played by the United States Federal Aviation Administration is also in the spotlight. This week, the US Department of Transportation said it was forming a special committee of outside experts to independently review the FFA's certification of the 737 MAX 8.
The most likely, logical thing is that the FAA was merely under-resourced, which has been a continuing mantra, less resources for regulatory and oversight agencies, which sometimes is a good idea, but very often it isn't.
Denise Savoya, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now in Cambridge, Massachusetts is Todd Curtis. He was an airline safety engineer at Boeing. In Washington, we have Jeff Guzzetti. He's a former director of the Federal Aviation Administration's Accident Investigation Division. And in Chattanooga, Tennessee is Jim Hall. He's the former chairman of the NTSB, or National Transportation Safety Board. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Good to have all these perspectives on the program. Jeff, let me start with you. We have Lion Air Flight 610.
Yes, sir.
We have Ethiopian Airlines 302. Hundreds of people dead. Is it Boeing's fault?
It's way too early to say. And typically, Imran, it's not usually one entity's fault. It's a whole list of reasons and contributing factors. And I think in both of these cases, it's too early to nail down what the actual cause and contributing factors were.
Jim Hall, the tools or the humans?
Well, again, as Jeff said, the investigation is underway, and it's too early, really, to know what the results of that investigation will be. I'm very pleased that in the interim period of time, the Department of Transportation Inspector General and Congress is looking at the certification process on this aircraft, and we'll be looking at how decisions were made around that process.
Todd Curtis, as we've experienced the aftermath of the tragedy, especially those, the people who've suffered loss when it came to the Ethiopian Airlines crash, and before that, the Lion Air flight, and then there was a grounded plane. A lot of people have been zeroing in on the anti-stall software, and they feel that there's definitely a connection here, and it's something to do with that. Do you feel that way?
Well, I feel that there's tantalizing evidence that there may be a connection. But as Chairman Hall and Jeff said earlier, it's entirely too early to draw a final conclusion. And certainly the Ethiopian authorities are looking very closely at this with respect to any connection with Lion Air. And to this point, there seems to be some sort of connection. Certainly that was a suspicion of all the various national authorities who grounded the aircraft before the U.S. authorities did.
And Jeff, if it can be determined that there was a problem with the automated system and there was a kind of hack, right? So there's a little bit of a nosedive and then you've got to do something manually to bring it back up. If that was the case, and I'm presupposing something here, if that was the case, was Boeing at fault for allowing these flights to take place anyway?
Well, Imran, Boeing doesn't really allow the flights to take place. That would be the Civil Aviation Authority in whatever country those Boeing products are flying in. And I think we can say, at least in the Lion Air accident, that there is evidence that this automated feature was involved in the accident sequence. But you need to learn more about what type of failure that was, and you have to consider the mitigating factors. Airline pilots are trained to handle these non-normal situations because every now and then an airplane is going to have a malfunction, and pilots should be trained as much. So with this automatic nose-down trim feature on the 737 MAX, that appeared to be involved in the Lion Air accident, and also there's suspicions it could be involved in the Ethiopian accident. To go back and say, hey, Boeing never should have allowed the airplane to fly, that's kind of a non sequitur. That isn't the way things work.
Okay, fair enough. So, Jim, is it naive of me to think, from the outside looking in, that if there's this seeming glitch, then these things shouldn't be in the air. If there's anything that allows a little dip and a nosedive, and maybe saying nosedive is a bit of an exaggeration, but if the nose goes down and you have to adjust it as a pilot, perhaps this is not as safe as it should be. Is that naive of me to say so?
Not at all. In this situation, I was very disturbed that this aircraft was not grounded by the FAA after the first accident with the information that was obtained in terms of the erratic behavior of the aircraft and this new system, which had been introduced only 2 years ago. So I hope that this will all be carefully examined, but this all goes to the certification process of this aircraft by the Federal Aviation Administration. And who made the decisions? There should be records in regard to that, in regard to the decision-making on the system that is in question.
Jeff, are we likely to see tightening of certification?
Sure we will in some fashion. I don't know exactly how. I know that there may be some discussion about that at the congressional hearing today. I would like to take this time, though, to disagree with Chairman Jim Hall, who I served under and is a great man with regards to aviation safety. But in this particular case, I think the FAA made the right decision in not grounding the airplane after the first accident because they already took action. They issued an emergency airworthiness directive to alert flight crews to this potential issue and pointed the flight crews to an already existing checklist, which is the stabilizer runaway checklist, which that same checklist would have resolved the problem immediately. The second accident, when it occurred, I think the FAA still made the right decision on not capriciously acting on, simple fear or public fear, and because they had no information at that time with regards to the Ethiopian accident. Then they got some. Then they got some refined satellite data, and they looked at trim settings in the wreckage themselves, and they used that data to ground the airplane. And I think throughout this whole investigative process over the last 6 months, the FAA has acted well. That said, something was missed in the certification of the 737 MAX with regards to this trim system, and the investigations, all these many investigations that are occurring now, hopefully we'll get to the bottom of that.
Jim Hall, do you accept that disagreement?
Well, I accept the disagreement. I have a great deal of respect for Jeff, but what the FAA did know or should have known was that system, Boeing had a separate company, and they were selling an added enhancement for safety of that system to some of the airlines. It had been purchased by some of the American airlines. There needs to be one level of safety in aviation, not one for the United States and another one for the developing world. It's our responsibility in the United States to guarantee the safety of our manufactured products. And in this case, the process, which I have stated over and over again, involves a very cozy relationship between Boeing and the FAA, needs to be examined, and changes need to be made to ensure the safety of our products.
And Todd Curtis, the person who would be in the job that you used to have at Boeing right now, airline safety engineer, what would they be thinking right now?
Well, that job, as I was in it about 20, 25 years ago during the 777 development, our group was intimately involved with the development process of the 777, ensuring that new systems, new designs met not only FAA requirements, but also Boeing requirements. In addition, we assisted our accident investigation group within Boeing to analyze current and past events. So whoever's in my old position in that old office, they're probably going over the records of many events, accidents, incidents, things that wouldn't rise to the level of being an official report, trying to see if there's some sort of sequence of events that they could see that has been manifesting itself before these two accidents, trying to give some insights into the accident investigating team that can give them answers to why these two airplanes crashed.
And Todd, has has the company been hurt? It's a leviathan. It's lost tens of millions of dollars in market share in recent weeks. This is a major company. They've come out with a few statements. Has their response been acceptable over the past few weeks?
Well, their response is muted because they're involved in both of the accident investigations, and by long-standing international agreement, it's the countries leading those investigations who are the last word on what the investigation has accomplished, what they have discovered. So if Boeing has discovered anything in the last few weeks, they will be silent on this because they have to defer to those authorities.
Jeff Guzzetti, how have you assessed Boeing's response over the past couple of weeks?
That's a good question, Imran, and I guess what Todd said is correct. There's not a lot of wiggle room for Boeing to make with regards to sending out a public message, because the ICAO Annex 13 standards says that only the Civil Aviation Authority, Accident Investigation Authority, has the authority to actually be the one voice publicly for the investigation. So Boeing has to be mute on many issues. That said, they can still say things like, we offer our condolences, or we're on top of this in some fashion. So I'm sure in hindsight, as their communications people look back on how they reacted, there's probably some room for improvement.
Jim Hall, questions from passengers around the world about airworthiness, trust. They wonder if they're going to be safe. Is that just natural now for people to be nervous that perhaps what seemed infallible is not so infallible after all?
Well, we've made great progress in aviation safety through a system of checks and balances similar to that which is used in the United States government. Boeing has been a fine corporation. They build excellent aircraft. The situation here that needs to be carefully examined is on the introduction of this new aircraft, were any boxes skipped, or were things done differently that resulted in these two tragedies that took almost 350 lives. Those are facts that are out there. This is not unusual. You know, Boeing introduced the 787. There were problems with the battery. The plane was grounded. There were things that were fixed on that aircraft, and it's back in service today. That's why we need to be very cautious and prudent in aviation. When we introduce a new aircraft and there is one crash and then a second, we don't need to be waiting for the third in order to make corrections.
Todd, is that a fair point?
That's a very fair point, because safety, or more precisely, the management of risk in aviation, is an ongoing enterprise. And one doesn't have to wait, and one should not wait for a tragedy to strike before problems that are seen are resolved. And this should be resolved not just because the FAA or some other entity, government entity says so, but because those directly involved in the design, manufacture, and operation of the aircraft have a responsibility and a duty to do so.
Right, and Jeff, as you mentioned earlier on, with Congress looking at it, with the Justice Department, with the Department of Transportation, the FAA, everybody's trying to get to the bottom of this. Do you believe that they will get to the bottom of this?
I do believe that they'll get to the bottom of this. Frankly, I think these growing number of investigations, some of them criminal investigations, is a little bit blown out of proportion, a little bit of hysteria in there. The most important investigations are the ones happening on the ground in Indonesia and Ethiopia. The Civil Aviation Authorities, so it's the KNKT in Indonesia, and it's the Civil Aviation Authority Accident Investigation Group in Ethiopia. They're purely motivated to determine the cause without any determining blame or culpability. They want to get to the cause and factors and issue recommendations. And with the help of the NTSB and Boeing and the FAA and the other parties to those investigations, they will get to the bottom of it.
Okay, well, Lion Air Flight 610 in Indonesia left 189 people dead. Ethiopian Airlines 302, 157 people killed. People want answers, lots of questions, lots of blame at the moment. And it's been really good to get somewhat technical analysis from all of you as to what could have possibly been the reason. And I appreciate the humility from all of you as well, despite all of your expertise. I really appreciate it. I don't get it a lot on this program, which is mainly political. So it's been fascinating to talk to all of you. Todd Curtis, Jeff Guzzetti, and Jim Hall. Good to have you on the Newsmakers.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The country has to move forward. I would not have allowed this election to happen if I had wanted to extend my power. Do you understand what I mean? All mechanisms should be aligned to the Constitution, which was voted by the people in the referendum.
In 2014, a military coup led to Thailand's elected Pheu Thai party being ousted. 5 years on, and the country has held its first post-coup election, but it's been mired in controversy and confusion. Early results suggested the pro-military Palang Pracharat party was well ahead in the popular vote. But former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra says the poll was plagued by inconsistencies. Whatever happened, the result remains unclear. And now 7 opposition parties determined to block the military's return to power say they've formed a coalition. They say that's enough to get rid of what they see as a military dictatorship. Well, let's go to Bangkok now, and joining me is Thitinan Pongsudirak. He's a political science professor and director of the Institute of Security and International Studies. Good to have you on the program. So, is this going to be disputed until May 9th? Is everybody going to claim that they won until then?
It's going to be a long, drawn-out process. You know, it's a pity because we've had 8 years with no elections, and 5 years of those 8 years have been under military government. So there's been a lot of expectation for some clarity, some new era, some democratic rule. But in fact, the vote was clear but controversial. You know, you had a kind of a split decision and a kind of an unfair, uneven playing field. So there are a lot of controversies, acrimony. So it's unclear. Until we have the final results announced in May, I don't think that we'll have a clear picture. And then we're looking at the government being formed officially in June. Until then, there'll be a lot of jogging, a lot of haggling, wrangling, horse trading. And, you know, it's unfortunate because that's what Thai people are fed up with Thai politicians, because they're always squabbling and wrangling for power, and that's what we're seeing now.
What gives the opposition Pheu Thai and their allies such confidence to make the claim that they're making right now?
Well, they have added up numbers, and they think they have enough to command a simple majority in the lower house of representatives. You know, we have a 500 member, so if you have 251, that's a bare minimum, bare majority. So they seem to have that up to 255. But let's remember, you know, it's I think a little bit premature. They're very eager to preempt the military government from returning. But in the weeks ahead, I suspect that the election commissions will investigate and maybe charge some fraud claims. So there'll be some by-elections, re-elections. So the numbers at the margins will shift around a little bit. By May, I'm not sure if the opposition bloc will still have this number.
Right. If the anti-military parties do win, does that necessarily mean that the military will be reduced in their role in the country and defanged from the politics?
Unlikely, because the military government and the military junta that seized power in May 2014, they have ensured that they will be supervising Thai politics for the long term. They set up a committee to write a new constitution. So a new constitution is really a kind of a pro-military, anti-politician, anti-political party kind of constitution. So, you know, in the longer term, they have the Senate that they will appoint. The Senate gets to select the prime minister. So you're looking at, you know, a bicameral legislature, but 1/3 of it belongs to the military already. So if the military can control 1/4 or even 1/2 of the lower house, they can kind of stay in power. But they will have a weak coalition government because the opposition bloc is strong enough to obfuscate, to stymie lawmaking.
Can we say that the days of coups are over? I mean, I don't know, I was trying to count, looking at the history, more than 20 confirmed and successful coups since the 1930s, right? So whether the pro-military parties or the anti-military parties win, the military will be involved and there, but can we say coups are off the table?
Imran, it's not easy to say that for Thailand because, you know, we've had 13 successful coups, I mean, 19 altogether, 20 constitutions since 1932 in 87 years. So, you know, Thailand has been up and down, it's been very volatile. However, the Thai economy has managed to develop, to grow. So there's been a decoupling between politics and the economy. We've had a coup cycle. There's a coup, you know, there's a new constitution, there's election, there's a government, there's some corruption, there's a coup again. This is known as Thailand's coup cycle. But this time, I think, in this new era, under a new monarch, it could be different. I think in the last 7 decades, under our previous king, who was very popular, widely revered, the military and the monarchy were seen as a symbiotic relationship. And so, you know, the coup making was part and parcel of that relationship. And the politicians and the political parties were weak. But this time, I think we're seeing some emergence of new parties, new generations, and maybe some strengthening of political parties. At the same time, a new king, new monarch, you know, it's not the same. He doesn't seem to want, His Majesty does not seem to want to be used as a political tool. And therefore, I think that maybe in this era, we may not see as many coups, but perhaps, you know, we can never dismiss a coup in Thailand, but the likelihood seems much less than the previous, than in the previous reign.
Right, so the numbers are contested at the moment, different sides claiming they're winning or have won. Can we say at the very least that there's been a democratic spirit to these elections?
There has been a democratic transition, but you know, the democratic transition remains under military custody, let's say. So the military still very much dominates Thai politics through the rules making, the constitution, and also through the referees, such as the Election Commission, and of course through the army, through the junta. So, you know, Thailand is still in the middle of the woods somewhere between military authoritarianism and democratic rule. We're looking for some kind of a balance to emerge out of this, to have some kind of democratic rule that works for the population, for Thai voters, but also that strengthens democratic institutions, at the same time maintaining some of the corporate interests of the military in order to have some kind of compromise. So that's what we're looking for. In the weeks ahead, I'm sorry to say, there's no closure, there's no complete clarity. It's a kind of a drawn-out drama. But within the next 18 months, I think we will see some kind of clarity.
And as part of the social contract, I guess the Thai people's relationship to the king is different to other people's relationship to monarchs, and with the military as well. So when it comes to the military, how much of a role do the Thai people want the military to have in the society? Is there an overwhelming respect for the military?
I think this is a question that, you know, sometimes Thailand is compared to Turkey, and I think it's a good comparison. I mean, increasingly Thai people want to get behind the military. They want to see the backs of the military. They want to see the military back in the barracks. But this means that the politicians and the political parties also have to deliver, to satisfy popular expectations, aspirations, and we're not seeing that yet. In the recent past, of course, the military has provided a backstop, it's provided some balance, but I think its days are numbered. The challenge will be to bring up a new civilian generation, civilian-led political leaders, political parties, in order to increasingly persuade the military, the army especially, to go back to the barracks.
Thitinan Pongsudirak, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for joining us on the Newsmakers. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. Check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, it's been a year since Palestinians began weekly protests at the Gaza border. The Great March of Return continues, but are demonstrators any closer to breaking the blockade? Until that debate, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.